just have a few thoughts too, being her favorite son-in-law. It's when you think of Seal, you immediately think of strength. She was probably one of the strongest people I've ever met in my life. But the strength by itself doesn't do her justice. This was a person that was constantly in control of every situation, control of life, control of the people around her that needed her help. This was true, when Cindy and I were in our early 20s when we got married. And, this was true in the last couple of weeks of her life. There was no doubt who was the head of the Birch extended family. Looking back on that too, when I dealt with Seal over the years, the last 40 years, it was no doubt in my mind why she was the head of the intensive care unit. She would be the one that everyone would look to in a crisis situation. The second trait that immediately comes to mind is what Cindy touched on as well, is the compassion. A lot of people have compassion. The thing that separated Seal was compassion without show. It's like Cindy said, she'd bring people into her life, and it wasn't a big to-do or whatever, and no one was ever asked whether this was going to happen or not. It was going to happen. This was her decision. It was the right thing to do. So we were going to have these guests at every holiday dinner, or we were going to be taking care of this person over here because she felt duty bound, and it was not a point of discussion at all. Third is demanding. She was a very demanding lady, no doubt about it. Anyone that worked with her or was involved with Seal knew that. But you couldn't get upset with her being demanding because she was just as demanding with herself, probably more so than ever. I remember one time I spent probably 4 or 6 weeks rebuilding the dock, and I'm out there every weekend, and this thing I think looks like gold. And so I'm thinking, hey, I'm golden for the next couple of months. I go over there the next weekend. She walks out there and she goes, there's a hole near the seawall here. This needs to be filled. It lasted probably about 20 minutes. It's my golden touch. So another thing that immediately comes to mind is those Sunday night dinners. Those damn Sunday night dinners. There was no excuse. I mean, those Sunday night dinners went on until we were well into our 30s. And you look back on it and you appreciate it now. But at the time, you're trying to, like any good child, you're trying to think of an excuse to not go. And we came up with every excuse possible. Seal, I broke my leg. No problem. We'll let you have the head of the table. And Seal, we're living in Tampa. No problem. Just leave a little earlier. But they were valuable. It was her way of making sure the family stayed together and that we were connected. Looking back on that too, I also think of, I can't understand why she wanted us, because we really weren't that good. Doug and I were well into our 30s and we were still having food fights. We both ended up in the ER a couple times for horsing around, but somehow she still wanted us over. Another thought that comes to mind is the infamous stink eye. Sally, you can appreciate this. It's reserved for family. I think, Pete, maybe you got one time. You had to be special to get the stink eye. And what it was someone in the family that dared challenge the authority. It wasn't done. And Cindy came home one time, she goes, I got the stink eye. I said, what's the stink eye? She goes, well, it's like a laser beam that shoots right through your body and just takes you down. I said, you're exaggerating. It can't be anything like that. Well, the last couple of days in the nursing home, I go over there, and Cindy told me, she goes, she needs a pad for her mattress. It's one of those waffle pads, or I don't like her mattress. So I'm telling Seal that, I'm going to go get her this mattress pad. And she goes, no. And I said, well, no, Seal, Cindy told me to go get that pad. And then it hit. I got the stink eye. There was no exaggeration. It took me down instantly. It would have taken down a missile. It's just, but if you got the stink eye, you knew you were family, and that's all right. So The other thing about Seal is she was not the type of person that would openly laugh a lot. Always a smile. She didn't do a whole lot of teasing, and if you guys know me at all, you know no one's exempt from my teasing. So from my early 20s on, Seal and I would always have an exchange, and after I said something particularly brilliant or did something really sharp, she'd remind me, and she goes, "Louis, Mike, you can be replaced." And you know, after a couple of years, I get a little cocky, and I said, "No, you can't, Seal. I've got seniority." This went on for 40 years. And so, true to form, my last words with Seal in the nursing home were, I made some brilliant remark. Seal goes, "Mike, you can be replaced." And I went, "No, Seal, you know, I have seniority." It was fitting, those are the last words. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Would anyone else want to say a few words? No obligation for anyone I know, but Jimmy?
This is prearranged, this is not something. Make a cute bear.